Hello, everybody. Hi, Dolores. Hi, Lana. Happy Saturday indeed. Share for a moment, please. Hi, Catherine. Very nice to see you. Thank you for coming. Just two more shares, folks, and I'll be with you. Okay, here I am. Hi, Barbara Warnig. Nice to see you here too. Thank you all for coming. No, thank you for sharing also. Looks like we got a pretty good start on the shares, at least for the beginning of the show. Okay, so I've been spending some time on the coronavirus and on the possibility of its spreading beyond the capacity of our system to control. Okay, I could go further with that idea, but I think the information on what's likely to happen is still a little dicey. What we know now is that we have a serious situation on our hands. We don't have any antivirals to to allow us to treat the virus of the COVID-19 virus. I'm sorry, the COVID-19, um, um, the actual disease, COVID-19. Uh, we don't have any antiviral treatments that have been proven to work so far. It's estimated we won't have any vaccines for at least a year. So, to say the least, we're looking at an outbreak which is likely to have a devastating impact on our nation, and of course also a devastating impact on our politics. Now, have we been thinking about that? Who's been thinking about that? We look at politics right now, and what we see is that it seems to be continuing, at least the campaign for the nomination on the Democratic side seems to be continuing in the usual way, with people focused on the primaries very, very strongly, and with the mainstream certainly organizing now solidly behind Joe Biden, which to many of the rest of us sounds like a truly disastrous choice. Um, Simply because of his past record, but also because of the lack of ability he seems to display to deal with any crisis. That is, the lack of cognitive, uh, um, 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 of a true cognitive ability to handle a crisis like this. Now, there have been some rumblings from the Obama camp, some rumors that maybe he's going to select as his running mate the Michelle Obama. And of course, if she's the VP in the White House, then there's going to be another person living not very far from the White House who can be quickly called in to consult, okay, and advise on any crisis. And obviously, that's what the mainstream is trying to put in place here. So maybe there's something to the rumor, and maybe that's what we're going to see. Uh, okay. So Biden will be running then uh, in a very close way to the idea of the second coming, okay, of Obama himself, okay, because he's looking for people to assume that the real power and competence behind the throne, in that case, is going to be our former president. That he will be, hopefully, or maybe this is the impression they're trying to give, he will hopefully be the actual president in fact. So, okay, I don't know if this is what the mainstream is going to try to pull, but this would give people the impression that the administration, okay, the Biden administration might have the competence to contain the outbreak. Of course, when this is going to happen, though, is in the fall. If it were to happen, it would happen. Well, actually, the election would happen in the fall. The role of Obama wouldn't be in place until next January sometime. And here we are, we're only in March, And perhaps by March of April of next year, we're already going to have a vaccine in place. So meanwhile, we have 9 more months of Trump to go before there's a change. And during those 9 more months, there's apparently going to be a lack of competence in the White House to handle the outbreak. So, this situation might very well cause hysteria in our politics. Of course, uh, whether that changes our politics or has a great impact on our politics, I don't know for sure, but I would speculate that this might have a great influence on our politics. Okay, but what happens, okay, if Bernie makes a comeback? And let's not even assume that he makes a comeback, but let's look at his strategy for a comeback um, over the next 2 weeks, his strategy and his tactics during that time. He hasn't said a lot about the by coronavirus outbreak thus far. He has called, however, for scientists to be running the crisis and for the politicians in the Trump administration to back off and let the scientists actually dictate the policy. However, it seems clear that the scientists won't be able to dictate the policy. Well, why not? Well, okay, and maybe not even the kind of campaign that Bernie should be running over the next week and a half. Well, why not? Let's take a look at the first of our articles. Let me get it up there. This is an article by Amy Goodman. Okay, and it appeared in Truthdig. I think it also appeared in Common Dreams, okay, as well. But regardless of that, let me go through it for you. So, Amy Goodman and her brother Dennis Moynihan co-wrote the article. And of course, she is the co-producer, the co-founder, the executive producer, and the host of Democracy Now!, okay, on NPR. And she begins by talking about something that was said by a passenger, a service representative at JFK Airport at a training session. And he said, quote, "We choose not to see a doctor for a health problem because it could be the difference between paying the rent, taking care of family, or getting needed care." And then she moves to Mike Pence, who met with airline execs to discuss the crisis. They, of course, said air travel is still safe, they concluded. Yet it was reported on the same day that one of the growing number of coronavirus cases in Los Angeles County was a medical screener at Los Angeles International Airport who said it wasn't clear if the illness was contracted at work or not. And by the way, there's been a case reported in the UK at Heathrow Airport where one of the baggage handlers came down with the coronavirus. So the point being, the illness certainly be contracted at work in the airports that we all use. So Amy says, one thing remains certain, the coronavirus doesn't care how wealthy you are or the political party you are in. The best way to be sure the person who's next to you isn't sick is to make health care available to everyone. The best way to achieve that is through Medicare for all. So why isn't the whole Democratic Party, but especially Bernie Sanders, currently calling for Medicare for all that it is worth to save the lives of perhaps hundreds of thousands of Americans by ensuring that they will have health care to treat this extremely dangerous virus? So far, they're not attempting to make this a central issue of the campaign. Why not? Have they taken leave of their senses? So Amy goes on to discuss the present situation and the fact that the Medicare program we have now is not really adequate to handle the crisis situation. We need the enhanced Medicare for all that's being offered by Bernie Sanders and by Jayapal in the House. But I want to make the point here that in order to provide a treatment for the virus, not only would the Medicare for All bill have to be immediately passed, H.R. 1384, for example, would have to be immediately passed, but also on the day after its passage, it would have to be possible for it to include all Americans. The authors say, quote, as the coronavirus pandemic spreads, it is in every individual's interest to know that all people have access to preventive and also diagnostic care, as well as treatment if needed. You don't want to come down with COVID-19 because a person you were next to in some public setting couldn't afford a deductible or copay, didn't have paid sick leave, or is among the 37 million in the United States who completely lack health insurance. Finally, seeing in one of these articles what's probably a correct estimate of the number of people who completely lack health insurance. Actually, most people in the campaign go around citing 28 million or 30 million. No, it is 37 million if you take into account all the people who've been thrown off of health insurance by the Republicans and the Trump administration since they gained control of the situation in early 2017. Anyway, last Monday, the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, issued a directive requiring New York health insurance insurers to waive cost sharing for coronavirus tests and related emergency room, urgent care, and office visits for those who already have insurance. But what about those who are not insured? How about the uninsured? No word on the uninsured. Awful lot of uninsured in New York State. I'm sure the figure is in the millions. At Monday's briefing, Pence pledged daily updates and full transparency. At Tuesday's briefing, the White House inexplicably banned video and audio recording. I wonder why. At the end of Wednesday's briefing, as Pence exited, and with cameras once again allowed, this exchange took place. A reporter one, can you give guidance for the uninsured? Can the uninsured get tested? Gentlemen, ladies, can the uninsured get tested? And Katie Waldman Miller, Pence's press secretary, who recently got married to Stephen Miller, a very noted, horrible right winger in the administration, the eminence grise in the administration right now, who's responsible for quite a few of its worst efforts. Anyway, she said, scream into the camera, it ain't going to get you anywhere. So reporter one said, well, how about answering the question? Reporter two said, we'd like an answer to the question. Reporter one said, it's a valid question. Could you answer it? The question was ignored. At New York City's major airports, workers like the first person I quoted, who was Vladimir Klajun, are represented by SEIU, the Service Employees International Union, 32BJ. Wheelchair attendants, security cleaners, and passenger service representatives are demanding state government action to improve their health care plans, which currently make health care unaffordable with high premiums and deductibles, the union said. In 2018, Trump disbanded the White House's pandemic response team and slashed the CDC's control and also prevention funds for assisting other countries, including China, with the task of actually preventing epidemics like the COVID-19 epidemic. So here we have an epidemic, and the United States had no funds to assist China in its response, and its attempt to contain the epidemic. Of course, now the epidemic has gotten out of China, and into many other countries. This may partly be Trump's fault. If there are many, many thousands of deaths as a result of a pandemic here, it can easily be laid at the door of the Trump administration because they disbanded the pandemic response team. So the conclusion of the article, of course, is that if we had a Medicare for All program, it would give our national healthcare system a much needed shot in the arm, which of course is very, very true, but it's much too weak a statement. Not having a Medicare for All bill in place now may result in a devastating pandemic in this country. Now, it's expected that very soon there will be the antiviral drugs available to begin to treat people suffering from COVID-19. However, when that happens, of course, it's going to be placed on the market by the pharmaceutical company that has the antiviral. And they're going to try to profit from it. And it's not going to be available for everybody because the antiviral is going to be in short supply. Using the neoliberal model we have now, the federal government won't be able to control the price or supply of the antiviral. So people are going to go without. And the disease, or the virus, I should say, is going to spread faster and wider, okay, in this country. And many more people, okay, are going to die. What's the remedy for that? The remedy for that is a Medicare for All bill now. So again, why isn't the party calling for that? Why aren't legislators calling for that? Calling for Medicare for All now. Calling for the passage of H.R. 1384 right now. There is no time to lose. One possible impact of the coronavirus on the campaign, therefore, could be that the Democratic candidates, and now there are still only 3 candidates, okay, who are in the race, it may result in one or more of them calling for the immediate passage of the Medicare for All bill. And as the pandemic gets more serious in our country, which it will most probably over the next 2 or 3 months, the calls will be louder and louder and louder. Of course, the person in the best position to exploit this or to gain from it, if we're looking at it strictly from a political point of view, would be Bernie Sanders. Except that things are happening too fast on the political front. We have these key primaries coming up this very month. And Bernie has to catch up in those primaries to be viable in April and in May. At this point, there's no guarantee that he will be viable in April, okay, and May. If Joe Biden does well enough on Tuesday, March 10th, and on Tuesday, March 17th, then Joe Biden may be viewed as being very close to having it all wrapped up. And without having had a severe political test of the perception that he is competent enough to be the president of the United States. Now, of course, hopefully Bernie will do very well over the next 2 weeks, that he will catch up to Biden, and he will even go a little bit ahead. And that will be very, very good. But even then, there'll be a decent chance that Biden can win. But apart from the politics of the matter, it's true that we really need Medicare for all right now, as soon as we can get it, because these cases are multiplying faster and faster. So when are our politicians going to act? What do they have to act to do? They have to act to guarantee free treatment to everyone if they are either in the process of falling ill because they have the virus, or because they already have symptoms and are suffering severely from it. They have to be able to get treatment not just in our emergency rooms, but in our hospitals. The test kits have to be there. And the facilities, the beds to treat people, have to be there. And there also has to be a strategy of containment in place. Okay? And a strategy of stalling the virus, so all our people don't get sick at once and overwhelm the healthcare system. So there's a lot to do. And the most important thing that can be put in place at this time, and should be put in place, is once again a Medicare for All Act. I don't hear loud calls for it yet. Make this the first really loud call for it. The virus, though, okay, and COVID-19, okay, the disease caused by the virus, can turn our politics upside down in very short order, and can make Trump so unpopular that he is sure to lose when the election comes around. But wait, so many people may die that there may be no election. In other words, if the deaths are great, sufficiently great, then the situation may call for the declaration of a martial law and for the declaration of an emergency. It certainly has the potential for that. And then Trump could try to get out of the election entirely. That's another possible political impact. Here's an interview by Zephyr Teachout with Matt Stoller. What Matt has been doing lately is researching and writing on antitrust questions and also monopoly and concentration of power in our businesses caused by the neoliberal structure of our society and by the application of the ideology of neoliberalism um, over some years. And this article by Teach Out, which details the interview, appeared in Jacobin on March 5th. And Zephyr points to Matt's recent book, which is Goliath, the 100-Year War Between Monopoly Power and Democracy. The book has very, very good reviews, and I think will be a major book for some years. Okay, Zephyr says, that when the stock market started crashing recently, she made a call to Stoller. And she had a wide ranging conversation that quickly led to how the Chicago schools consumer welfare paradigm, which is part of the ideology of neoliberalism, which posits that the only reason that a monopoly should ever be considered harmful is if it raises prices and harms consumers. That this paradigm is making all of us less safe this year, and his book is telling us how we should rethink industrial policy around ideas like the productive capacity. So, quote, for Stoller, the coronavirus is deadly not just because of its infectiousness, but because of the way we have spent 40 years since by Ronald Reagan building a system that is designed to pay out big profits to financiers, and that is fragile and capable of quick but collapse. We're seeing the possibility of a collapse actually right now. And Zephyr Teachout says his big message to the left is that we need to get ahead of the crisis through rewriting the rules of financial markets and making major investments in our domestic manufacturing capacity. The coronavirus, he argues, is making the argument for antitrust. Single sources of supply for all kinds of suddenly essential medical needs, leading to shortages and could cause huge price jumps. Absolutely. And how devastating would that be if we have the sudden appearance of an antiviral that everybody wants? And Teachout says, the coronavirus is exposing a major foundational myth at the heart of Chicago school thinking, that having a maximalist free trade policy, having efficiency, and a consumer welfare standard are stable systems. And she says, all lead to short-term profits and long-term risk. We should replace those with a more diverse and stable set of economic values, redundancy in supply chains, diversity in production by locations, increase in our productive capacity, and also programs that are universal for everyone. And she says, and because this pandemic is serious and won't be the last, we need to act very quickly. And here's the interview. Okay, I'm not going to go over the whole interview. I think that will take too much time. I think the main points have actually really been made, but I commend the article to you. She has summarized the main points well in the opening. Okay, let's see if there's anything here that I really want to quote. So Zephyr at one point asked, so how do you take these supply chain issues and connect that to a federal trade policy, to NAFTA, for example? And Matt says, our legislators in the 1990s and 2000s implemented a whole set of policies that led us to pool risk in hidden ways throughout our supply chains. But deregulation led us to pull risk off the balance sheets for banks. And NAFTA was an important part of that, because NAFTA makes it easier to move factories away from where they produce goods for. So a factory in Cleveland is making medicine for people in Cleveland. But if you move it to Mexico, it's less resilient because it's harder to get stuff from Mexico to Cleveland. And he says, the reason we've killed a lot of our redundancy in supply is because of the power buyers. Walmart, for example, across the economy. In the medical sector, it's not Walmart. It's what are called group purchasing organizations, like, for example, Kaiser Permanente, which are basically hotel or hospital cartels that buy medical supplies. And then there are also GPOs for drugs, because there's only 3 or 4 of them. They squeeze the supplier so aggressively that there's no margin in making generic pharmaceuticals or in making medical supplies. So you see the creation of power sellers, and often to eke out as much margin as possible, they will move the supply chains to China. So Zephyr says, well, we need a critical manufacturing capacity quickly built in the United States. So when there's a shock to the system in China or elsewhere, we can survive that. And Matt says, well, it's not just tweaking trade policy or doing some antitrust or doing some federal spending. You need all of the above. You need another New Deal. Says we need to have a financial system based on lending to people who are going to do interesting and useful things. And that's going to require a whole revamp. Maybe we need to have a financial system that's based on government grants to people. Not so much on lending to people as on grants. But that's another question. So Zephyr says to Matt, so I can already anticipate the smoke coming out of your ears when I ask this. But it's important. Won't people say that the markets can take care of that themselves? That now we have a pandemic, we will see money flow to manufacturing in the United States? And Matt says, no. The underpinning of all our policy framework, everything from trade to regulations to antitrust, is this notion of consumer welfare and efficiency. We focused on making sure we have cheap consumables in every market, in every sector. And the antitrust people have always said the law protects competition, not competitors. How does that improve consumer prices? They have really looked down on the idea that, the producers have rights. And that's true in the trading world too, right? If you can't compete against China, that's your own problem. And if China wants to subsidize their own steel manufacturers, then great. That attitude treats all this productive capacity as irrelevant. The only thing that matters is what we consume, what we can consume immediately tomorrow. And he says that whole philosophical framework, we've got to chuck it. We should replace it with a more balanced approach that looks at the productive capacity. And by the way, this is also what we need to look at to protect against inflation, okay, as well. In other words, inflation occurs when you go beyond your productive capacity. So we've got to look at what that is and think hard about how to expand it in areas where we're going to need productive capacity here at home. So Zephyr asks, so we can't just keep the same legal framework and ask the market to adjust, even with a major subsidized push to manufacture things. And Matt says, I'll put it this way. Private equity is a bunch of arsonists. They're going around burning things down. What we're saying is we need to be rebuilding things, but we also need to stop those people from burning everything down. So yes, you can put together a plan and you can finance the rebuilding of things. He might have said, okay, so yes, Elizabeth Warren, you can put together a plan and you can finance the rebuilding of things. But if you don't stop the arsonists, they're just going to burn it down again. Indeed, we should invest a lot in manufacturing. But even if we were able to do that competently, unless we get rid of this framework that says short-term consumption is the only thing that matters and productive capacity, okay, is irrelevant, okay, and also remember why they say that. They say that because they're thinking, well, China can supply all the productive capacity that's necessary. Of course, that's a problem when we have products, services, and goods whose supply we have to guarantee here domestically, because we can't guarantee the flow of trade, can we? Matt says we have to do a lot of industrial policy, have to do a lot of financing, a lot of relearning of the industrial arts. Matt says, I think it's going to cost, after Zephyr asked him, he says, I think it's going to cost between $300 and $500 billion. Chuck Schumer proposed $8.5 billion, which is a pittance, but that's what passed. Trump said $2.5 billion, which is a joke, says Matt. And Zephyr asks, what is that going toward? That's going towards pandemic response, vaccine development, and then supporting small business. The four buckets I laid out, supporting small business supply chains. Right now, the Treasury market is screaming for the government to borrow money and spend it. We should be doing that. Well, again, I don't really agree. I think that what we should do is to have the Federal Reserve create the money and spend it. And why? Because I don't want those neoliberals screaming about the debt in 2 or 3 years. And even if you borrow $600 billion and just spend it on grants to cities and states, says Matt, that's probably money well spent anyway. This is the kind of thing that's like the financial crisis. You want to get ahead of it. Zephyr says, you said some very positive things about the Democratic response, but that the scale is just too small. And Matt says, quite a lot of our libertarian framework that we're operating under right now is just going to seem like a joke in a month. And then he adds, I think that democratic socialists are thinking hard, and that's really important. And the people that are behind Bernie Sanders and Bernie understand industrial structures in a fundamental way because they understand that labor is an important input into making things. Zephyr says, that's true. When I met him in 1994 explaining his anti NAFTA vote, it was all about labor. And Matt says, regarding the coronavirus, by the way, I'm laying out what I think is a moderate baseline. It's always possible that this is going to disappear. The weather warms up, and it actually turns out it's not a big deal. In that case, I would be overjoyed to be wrong. I do not want our supply chains to collapse. My ideal scenario for this is that it is scary, but not actually destructive. But honestly, I'm looking at the Trump administration. They're just idiots. It's really embarrassing. They just put Larry Kudlow, basically a stock market speculator and business writer, on the virus response team with Mike Pence and Steve Mnuchin. John Stokes says that in the 20th century, pandemic response was about saving lives, and that now it's about saving markets. Okay, and this is still Matt. And that's just crazy. And I don't think that's isolated to the United States. That's insane, and I don't think we should tolerate that. I don't think we should tolerate it either. And I don't even know if the estimate of between 300 and 500 billion is right. It depends on what you include in the 300, and 500 billion. If you include the cost of passing a Medicare for All bill, and doing that immediately, which is something I think we very well need to do to respond to this pandemic. Of course, then you're talking about the cost of Medicare for All actually thrown in. We don't know entirely what that cost, is going to be yet. It's important whether we look at it as a total cost, or as a government cost. As a total cost, it's going to be less than what we're spending now. But it will involve an increase in government spending on healthcare, somewhat. And so that might add another 300 to 500 billion to the estimate of the response that Matt has made each year. So considerations like this show that this crisis, the coronavirus crisis, has the capacity to motivate a major change in our politics. I see now, I guess, that I never shared that page with you. I thought I did, but I guess I did. Sorry about that, folks. So, anyway, here I am. Okay, I'm back again, to my normal view. If the changes that Matt has estimated and the changes that I've talked about as a result of the huge number of deaths that may occur due to the crisis, if that happens, And if somewhere along the line this has a major impact on the presidential campaign, which I think it's going to do really maybe as soon, okay, as next month, I'm worried that it won't have the desired impact in the next 2 weeks or so. But there's reason to believe that the doubling time of coronavirus cases at this point is every 6 days. So that means by 3 weeks from now, how rapidly it's spreading is going to be very noticeable in the United States. But on the other hand, over the next 2 weeks, the noticeable rise and the emergency type of situation, okay, that we're in may not be completely clear to primary voters on March 10th and March 17th. In fact, it may not become clear to primary voters until, hang out for a second, looking again at the calendar, the primary calendar. What's happening may not be fully apparent to primary voters until the 4th of April or maybe the 7th of April, which specifically is the Wisconsin primaries. Of course, the Wisconsin primary, okay, and the Excella primary, in other words, the primaries in Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, and New York, and Pennsylvania, okay, and Rhode Island, the second of those, that is to say, the Excella primary, so-called, will take place on April 28th. By then, okay, the dimensions of the crisis could very well be sufficiently great that voters will be very clear on what's happening and very clear on the need for Medicare for all, but as soon as possible, right now. And this might swell Bernie Sanders' vote in all those states. But if Joe Biden does well enough in the primaries, but going through March, he could make it almost impossible for Bernie to catch up in April, in May, and in June. So that's the situation we're looking at. I think it's a terrible one for us because we really need Medicare for all right now. Okay, and I think the pressure has to be placed on Trump to back the passage of Medicare for all immediately. And the only thing that can probably do that is people flocking to Bernie Sanders because they realize that we have to have Medicare for all right now. And they flock to Bernie in such numbers that Trump gets scared and supports a bipartisan bill to pass H.R. 1384. In other words, a bill that makes H.R. 1384 a bipartisan bill. So these are some of the impacts on politics we may be seeing. I obviously have been speculating on this, but I think we all have to think about this. Not just me, but everyone should be thinking about what the full range of implications of the spread of the coronavirus and the occurrence of COVID 19 is. We need to be thinking more about those implications. Okay, I think it's actually Pramilla. I think that's how you spell her first name. I think that's wrong too. Okay, there may be an L. Okay, there may be an A. Okay, at the beginning. No, I don't know. I'm going to have to look up her first name, right? Uh, yeah, she should be in Congress screaming for it every day. Not only did she help to write H.R. 1384, she was the principal author of it. She was the principal author and sponsor of H.R. 1384, currently the gold standard, okay, in Medicare for all bills. Right. Okay, so I'm here now to consider your comments. I'm going to refresh my page first. I'm going to refresh my page first. Okay, I'll get rid of the echo. Okay, so any comments on this? Kay says, hi, Jim. And Jim says, hi, all. Kay says, they should be calling for it now. And Dale's Weaver says, good evening. Sorry I'm late. Hi, Dale. Carmen Muniz says, in Florida, we're told to notify the health department if we get symptoms. Yeah, so they can isolate you. Carmen says, how about economic stabilizing programs and services for people quarantined inside unable to work, like automatic food stamp eligibility for low-income patients and or basic income, so patients don't lose their apartment or house because they can't work. Well, what I favor actually is a bill to replace their wages when they cannot go to work, actually continue the wages. In other words, a guaranteed wage program but for people who have to leave work, okay, and be at home during that particular period. I also favor a job guarantee program, okay, as well, which would allow them to work out of their homes at a distance. Carmen asks, I do not see anyone else's comments. Is anyone else here? Well, according to my screen, there are 9 people here. Carmen says, okay, I think everyone is just listening, not commenting at this point. We people are stunned by the impact of Mother Nature hitting back against the abuses of man's abuses. And Kay says, Carmen, sometimes payback is hell. And she says, this is going to be a huge mess real soon. And Russ says, Dr. Joe would appreciate you getting a copy of Ballinger's book, Clint Ballinger's book, 1000 Castaways, going through it, and perhaps consider having him on as a guest. And thank you, Russell. I'll take a look at it. And Russ says, I really appreciate how he speaks of economics in terms of horizontal and vertical systems and how he uses the terms System 1 and System 2. It's an easy book to go through. And he uses zero neoclassical economic language. He's an interesting person. Okay, thank you, Russ. Lana says, I have just been listening in. And Steve Gonzo says, hello, somebody. I like that. Hello, somebody. Those are the words of hopefully the next Vice President of the United States. Yes. Let's see. Let me get back to where we are. And Carmen says, I know 3 people died from COVID 19 in Florida that weren't actually reported previously. And Russell says, this one kills 10 to 15% of people over 70 who get the bug. Okay. I don't think that's established yet. It certainly is not established that it kills 10 to 15% of people over 70 who get it. It may possibly be 10 to 15% of people who show up with symptoms. That might be the case. And that also might be the case in situations where antivirals, are not available, or vaccines, are not available. But the antivirals may start to become available. There was one whose testing was about to be finished, I guess, about a week ago. If it turns out to be somewhat effective to alleviate things, then it may tend to lower the rate. But I'm not sure where the statistic of 10 to 15% of people over 70 actually comes from. I'd actually be surprised at that particular statistic because it looks like in the population at large that fatality rates for those who show up with symptoms are coming in at about 3.2% at this point, or 3.4%. Now that is high enough, but the people over 70 are lumped into that group. And I think if they had a fatality rate of 10 to 15%, that 3 to 4% would be a higher figure. Kay says, Carmen, there are supposedly 5 being tested here in Ohio, but no idea where in Ohio yet. They could at least give us some info. And Russ says, oh, this was an interesting thread on Twitter today. Yes, I saw the thread, and I considered also taking it up. I did not do so because I'm still not sure of the assumptions she made. But the assertion that I made, that there was a doubling of cases every 6 days came from the information that she presented on Twitter. Okay, I actually rolled up the thread. Okay, and I have the whole thread. Carmen says, precisely, the more info, the less stress, the less weakened immune system. And Kay says, and we would have a clue where to watch out. Yes, we would. And Kay says, so many smaller and rural hospitals have closed all over this country. If we had funding, we can reopen some or all just for this. We could reopen some or all for good. And they're probably needed. Carmen says, I just think the government is underreporting to keep us consuming for profits to go to corporations and industries. I'm sure there's an element of that in this, Carmen. He says, I have low doses of vitamin C throughout the day, every 4 to 6 hours, and two times 175 milligram of 175 milligram of milk, but thistle before going to sleep. Herbal teas like cloves with orange rind is wonderful for excess mucus in the respiratory tract. Well, it is for me, and it's really cheap. What about you guys? What might you be doing to keep your immune system stable? Carmen says doses correction, stupid keyboard sticks. Carmen says the federal government can open them straight away. Funding is not a constraint, only resource constraint. Carmen says, be back in a little while, something came up. Kay says, I take B complex with C and vitamin E for heart circulation and breathing. I sure miss the wild elderberry bushes we had in our old yard. I used to pick what we could get away from the birds and cook them in breads, pancakes, etc. Never had the flu for over 20 years. Well, that may work. And then she says, Jayapal ought to be in Congress screaming for it every day. She helped to write the bill. She should be. And Jim Bird has joined. And we have some new comments. Rob says, hey, Yoda. And Russ says, mint the damn coin, time to get to work. Actually, in a tweet just yesterday, the suggestion was made, okay, by Rohan Gray to mint the $100 trillion coin, have a job guarantee program, and have the Fed have freed up to issue debt instruments, okay, to the private sector. That, of course, is for the purpose of draining off excess money from the private sector to help to control inflation. Okay, of course, I completely agree with the proposal from Rohan. Monadel says, I can take vitamin C every day. I can't take vitamin C every day. It thins the blood, and bloody nose is the result. But I bought some high-end 1,000 milligram of vitamin C to take 2 to 3 times a week. We have some of that, okay, at home, and we may begin to take it, but we have to see how that is likely to mix with the Budwig diet, okay, that we're on now, which uses flaxseed oil, which is also a blood thinner. So I think I have to be a little careful about that. But there are people who report that vitamin C helps. The Chinese seem to think it does, and they've been using it. Okay, any other comments or questions? So, okay, I hope this session gets you thinking about the political implications of the virus. I think our thinking about that is going to get increasingly important over the next month, and it would be good if we were all thinking about that and getting the politicians to think about it and to speak about it and to react to it, okay, and to write about it. So, since I don't see any more comments, I think I'm going to say good night for tonight. I'll be back, okay, on Monday night. Hashtag Medicare for All is right, Lana, and good night to you, okay, and to everyone.